I was being brought to set in a wheelchair. Like, I couldn't walk that far. So I had to tell everybody because I needed help. You know, I needed someone to help me stand, and I needed someone to help. I needed someone to help me to get there.
After nearly 4 decades of silence, Christina Applegate finally broke her silence about Ed O'Neill. What she revealed at the reunion left everyone stunned. The confession was so unexpected, so raw, that even the people who worked alongside them for 11 years never saw it coming. This wasn't about fame. This wasn't about Hollywood gossip. What Christina exposed about Ed O'Neill changes everything we thought we knew about their relationship. The truth had been hidden in plain sight for 37 years. And now, after everything she's been through, Christina decided it was finally time to tell the world what really happened behind those closed doors. 1987. A 15-year-old girl walks onto one of the most controversial television sets in America. The lights are blinding. The crew is loud. The energy is chaotic. And right in the middle of all of it stands a man in his early 40s who nobody expected would change her life forever. That girl was Christina Applegate. And that man was Ed O'Neill. Most people remember Married with Children as a groundbreaking sitcom. Crude jokes. Outrageous characters. A family that insulted each other before it was cool. But what most people never knew was what was happening when the cameras weren't rolling. What was happening in the quiet moments between takes. What was happening behind closed doors. And that is exactly what Christina has started to expose. When Christina joined the cast as Kelly Bundy, she was just a teenager. A child, really. Thrust into a show that pushed every boundary network television allowed at the time. The character she was playing was written as a teenage sex symbol. The outfits were revealing. The jokes were suggestive. The attention from the public was immediate and overwhelming. For a 15-year-old girl, that kind of spotlight can be dangerous. But something happened on that set that nobody talked about for decades. Something that shaped Christina Applegate into the woman she is today. And it all started with Ed O'Neill making a quiet decision that nobody asked him to make. He decided to protect her. Not because it was in his contract. Not because a producer told him to. Ed O'Neill looked at this teenage girl surrounded by adults in a very adult environment and made a personal choice to be her shield. Her guide. Her protector. But here's what nobody knew. The lengths he went to were far greater than anyone ever realized. Cast members who worked on the show have spoken about watching Ed pull Christina aside between takes. Checking on her. Quietly redirecting conversations that were heading somewhere inappropriate. Making sure that even on a show known for pushing limits, the environment around Christina remained safe. This wasn't a small thing. This was years of deliberate, consistent protection. Christina spent 11 years on that set. She went from 15 to 26 inside that production. Those are the years that shape a person completely. The years where identity is formed. Where confidence either grows or gets destroyed. And she has finally admitted that Ed O'Neill was the reason those years built her up instead of breaking her down. But the real question is this. Why did it take 37 years for Christina to say any of this publicly? What was she holding back? And what exactly happened on that set that still hasn't been fully revealed? The answer to that starts with a single moment that almost ended everything before it even began. 1989. The show had only been on the air for 2 years. The cast was still finding their rhythm. Christina was 17 years old. And then, without warning, everything they had built together came under attack. A woman named Terry Ricalta watched an episode of Married with Children and decided she had seen enough. She launched a full-scale campaign to destroy the show. She contacted advertisers. She went on news programs. She wrote letters. She was determined to get Married with Children pulled off the air for good. And at first, it was working. Major companies pulled their advertising. The network started having emergency meetings. Executives were panicking. And the cast, the people who showed up every day and poured themselves into this show, were left watching their careers potentially disappear in real time. For Christina, this was terrifying. She was 17 years old. This show was everything. And suddenly, one person's outrage was threatening to take it all away. The uncertainty was crushing. But what happened next inside that production has rarely been discussed. Because while executives panicked and advertisers fled, Ed O'Neill did something that nobody expected. He gathered the younger cast members. He sat down with Christina and David Faustino, who played her brother Bud. And he told them something that Christina has never forgotten. He told them that no matter what happened, they had already created something real. Something that mattered. And that nobody could take that away from them. Those words sound simple. But for a 17-year-old girl watching her career potentially collapse, those words were everything. Ed didn't stop there. He stepped in front of the cameras himself. He gave interviews defending the show. But more importantly, He made sure that in every public conversation about the controversy, someone was speaking up for the young people who worked on it. He refused to let Christina and David become collateral damage in a culture war that had nothing to do with them. What happened next was something nobody predicted. The boycott backfired. All the negative attention made people curious. Viewers who had never watched the show suddenly tuned in to see what all the outrage was about. Ratings didn't just survive. They went up. Way up. The campaign that was designed to destroy Married with Children had accidentally made it more popular than ever. But Christina has said that what she remembers most from that period isn't the ratings. It isn't the victory. What she remembers is Ed O'Neill standing steady when everyone else was falling apart. She remembers watching him handle a crisis with a calm that she had never seen before. And she remembers deciding, in that moment, that she wanted to be that kind of person someday. That experience bonded the cast in ways that never made it onto television. They had faced destruction together. And they had come out stronger. But the real test of their bond was still coming. And nobody on that set could have predicted how severe it would be. Here is something the producers of Married with Children never talked about publicly. The show was not as tightly scripted as most people assumed. The cast had room to improvise, to experiment, to try things that weren't written on the page. And Ed O'Neill used that freedom to do something nobody expected. He used it to teach Christina Applegate how to act. In the moments between scenes, Ed would throw unexpected lines at Christina during takes. He would change his delivery without warning. He would shift the energy of a scene just to see how she would respond. Not to throw her off. Not to make her look bad. But to force her to think on her feet. To react authentically. To stop performing and start existing inside a scene. It was an acting masterclass disguised as a sitcom. Christina has talked about how those moments transformed her as a performer. How Ed's willingness to challenge her quietly, consistently, without ever making her feel small, gave her a confidence she didn't know she was missing. He wasn't just her scene partner. He was her teacher. But there's another layer to this that has almost never been discussed. Ed didn't just protect Christina inside the scenes. He protected her outside of them too. Cast members who spent years on that production have shared stories about watching Ed position himself near Christina during difficult situations. About seeing him step in when conversations around her started heading somewhere inappropriate. About watching him shield her from the parts of Hollywood that could have left permanent damage on a young girl who wasn't yet equipped to handle them. He did this without making it obvious. Without embarrassing her. Without making her feel like she needed to be saved. He simply made sure that the environment around her was safe. That is not a small thing. In an industry with a long history of failing young women, Ed O'Neill's quiet, consistent protection of Christina Applegate is remarkable. And Christina knows it. She has spoken about how those years, despite the chaos of the show, despite the controversy and the pressure and the public scrutiny, never felt unsafe to her. She always felt like someone was watching out for her. She always felt like, if something went wrong, there was someone in her corner. That someone was Ed. But here is what makes this story even more interesting. As the years went on, something about their dynamic shifted. Christina wasn't just a student anymore. She wasn't just the teenager that Ed was looking out for. She was becoming something else entirely. And Ed could see it happening before anyone else could. By the later seasons of the show, Christina was no longer following Ed's lead. She was bringing her own ideas. Her own instincts. Her own power to the table. And what Ed did in response to that shift is something Christina has only recently started talking about. Because what he did next says everything about the kind of man he really is. 1997. 11 years. 260 episodes. And then, without warning, it was over. Married with Children didn't get a grand finale. There was no emotional goodbye episode. No celebration of what they had built together. No closure for the characters or the people who had played them for over a decade. The show was cancelled. And just like that, the family that had formed on that soundstage was expected to scatter and move on. Christina has talked about how disorienting that period was. One day you have a routine. You have a place to be every morning. You have people around you who know you better than almost anyone else in your life. People who have watched you grow from a teenager into an adult. And then the next day, all of it just stops. The set gets torn down. The crew moves on to other jobs. The family you spent your most formative years with suddenly disappears. For Christina, who had been on that show since she was 15, the ending wasn't just the end of a job. It was the end of the only professional family she had ever known. But what has rarely been discussed is what happened between Ed and Christina in the weeks and months after the cancellation. Because unlike most TV casts who drift apart once the cameras stop rolling, these two didn't let the distance grow. Ed kept calling. He kept checking in. He would meet Christina for meals and ask about her career. He offered advice when she asked for it and quiet support when she didn't. The TV father and daughter relationship hadn't ended just because the show had. It had simply moved off screen. Christina went on to build an impressive career after the show. Films, awards, critical acclaim, new television projects that proved she was far more than just Kelly Bundy. And through all of it, Ed was watching, following her career with a pride that went deeper than professional admiration. It was the pride of someone who had watched her become who she was. Ed's own career skyrocketed after the show as well. Modern Family turned him into one of the most celebrated sitcom actors of his generation. Awards, critical praise, a whole new audience who knew him as Jay Pritchett. But in interviews, when the conversation turned to career highlights, Ed would bring up Christina. He would talk about watching her grow. That is not something actors do about their former co-stars. That is something fathers do about their daughters. But just when it seemed like both of their lives had found a settled rhythm, just when the story seemed like it might have a peaceful ending, something happened that shattered everything. Something that nobody saw coming. Something that changed Christina Applegate's life in a way she never could have prepared for. And when Ed O'Neill found out, his response revealed exactly who he is. August 10, 2021. Christina Applegate posted something on social media. A few sentences. Simple words. But the impact was immediate and devastating. She had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The disease had been discovered while she was filming the final season of her Netflix show Dead to Me. She had kept it private for months while she processed what it meant for her life. And then she decided to tell the world. Multiple sclerosis is a disease that attacks the central nervous system. It affects movement, balance, vision, cognitive function. There is no cure. The symptoms can be managed, but the disease never goes away. For someone whose entire career had been built on physical performance, on presence, on energy, the diagnosis was more than a medical reality. It was a life sentence that required rebuilding everything from the ground up. Christina now uses a cane to walk. She has spoken openly about cognitive fog that makes certain tasks difficult. She has described watching her body change in ways she never anticipated and never wanted. The grief of that, the mourning of a future she thought she would have, has been a private and ongoing battle. But what Christina has revealed about who showed up for her in the aftermath of that announcement tells you everything you need to know about the relationships she built during those 11 years on Married with Children. Ed O'Neill reached out immediately. Not a brief text. Not a public post. A genuine, personal response that made clear he wasn't going anywhere. That he was still there. That nothing had changed between them. The entire cast rallied. Katie Sagal, who played her TV mother, became vocal in her public support. David Faustino posted messages of love. The family that had formed on that soundstage 37 years earlier proved that it was never just a performance. But Ed's response hit differently. Because Christina knew what it meant coming from him. This was the man who had protected her when she was 15. The man who had stood steady during the boycott crisis. The man who had watched her become who she is. And here he was again. Showing up. Steady. Unchanged. Christina has spoken about how important it was, during one of the darkest periods of her life, to have people around her who truly knew her. Not the public version of her. Not Kelly Bundy. But her. The person who had formed during those 11 years on a chaotic, controversial, groundbreaking set. Ed O'Neill is one of those people. The diagnosis raised serious questions about the future. About any potential reunion. About whether the full Bundy family could ever come back together on screen. But the cast made one thing clear very quickly. Whatever a reunion looked like, it would be built around Christina. They would not do it without her. They would find a way. But first, Christina had something she needed to do. Something public. Something brave. Something that nobody who saw it will ever forget. November 2022. Christina Applegate was being honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. For someone managing a chronic illness that affects energy and mobility, simply attending an event of this scale required an enormous amount of courage. She could have stayed home. Nobody would have blamed her. She showed up. She arrived with a cane. Her movements were slower than they used to be. But she was present. She was there. And she was surrounded by people who loved her, including Katie Sagal, who stood by her side through the entire ceremony. What Christina said that day left people in tears. She talked about her diagnosis openly. She talked about fear. About uncertainty. About what it means to lose the version of yourself that you thought would always be there. And she talked about what it meant to have people in her life who had shown up when things got hard. She talked about Married with Children. About the people who had helped shape who she became. But the moment that truly broke the room open came 2 months later. January 2023. The Emmy Awards. Christina Applegate walked onto that stage with her cane. And before she could say a single word, the entire room stood up. Every person in that audience rose to their feet. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. It lasted nearly a full minute. And Christina stood there, visibly emotional, as the weight of that moment hit her from every direction. She handled it exactly the way you would expect her to handle it. She made a joke. As the audience continued to shake from the thunderous applause, she made a comment about the shaking rattling her brain. The room laughed through their tears. It was heartbreaking and hilarious at the same time. Which is exactly who Christina Applegate has always been. What most people watching at home didn't know was what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. Old friends found her throughout the evening. Former colleagues reached out. People she had worked with decades earlier made sure she knew she was loved. Ed O'Neill was among them. Their exchange that night was private. But what Christina has said about it since tells you everything. She has described that evening as a reminder of what is real. Of what lasts. Of what actually matters when everything else falls away. And what lasts, for Christina Applegate, is the relationship she built with a man she met when she was 15 years old. A man who chose to protect her when he had no obligation to do so. A man who has shown up consistently, quietly, and genuinely for nearly 4 decades. That is what she exposed about Ed O'Neill. Not a scandal. Not a secret. Not something dark or damaging. Something far more powerful than any of that. But there is still one part of this story that hasn't been told yet. One thing Christina has hinted at but never fully said out loud. And it might be the most important part of all. The reunion conversations are still happening. Streaming platforms. Special formats. Ways to bring the Bundy family back together that work around Christina's health needs. The cast is willing. The audience is waiting. And Christina herself has said she isn't done yet. But there is something else. Something she mentioned recently in a way that felt almost accidental. A detail about those early years on the set that she has never fully explained. Something about a specific moment between her and Ed that happened during the first season of the show. She started to describe it. And then she stopped. She said she wasn't ready to talk about that part yet. The question is, what happened during that first season that Christina Applegate still isn't ready to say out loud?